Chapter 11, Counteroffer. Morning sunlight slanted through the windows of Riverside Cafe, transforming the small tables into islands of golden illumination. Eleanor had arrived 15 minutes early, as was her habit for any appointment, professional or otherwise. She'd selected a corner table that afforded both privacy for conversation and a clear view of anyone entering the establishment. 3 days had passed since the night with Leo. 3 days of focused work on the historical designation application, of carefully compartmentalized emotions, of professional discipline maintained through sheer force of will. 3 days in which breakfast had mysteriously appeared at her door each morning, accompanied by notes of increasing whimsy and perfectly brewed coffee in a thermos. Today's had read, Day 3 of Operation Caffeination. Target continues to require nutritional support while saving neighborhood. Mission proceeding as planned. She hadn't responded to any of the notes, hadn't called, hadn't returned to Cornerstone Books. The historical designation work provided convenient justification for this distance. She was gathering documentation, coordinating with city officials, building the strongest possible case. But in quiet moments, Eleanor acknowledged the truth beneath these practical reasons. She was afraid, not of Leo himself, but of what he represented, a fundamental recalibration of everything she'd built her identity around, precision giving way to adaptation, planning surrendering to presence, security sacrificed for connection. Now, as she arranged the historical designation documents in precise stacks on the cafe table, Eleanor found herself rehearsing arguments as if preparing for court. Only this time, her imagined opponent wasn't opposing counsel, but Richard Kincaid, the man who threatened both Cornerstone Books and her fragile new understanding of what might actually matter. A shadow fell across her table. Eleanor looked up to find Diane, the cafe owner, standing with a steaming mug that emanated the rich aroma of properly brewed coffee.
On the house, darling. You look like you're preparing for battle.
That obvious?
You've got your war paint on.
Eleanor's hand moved unconsciously to her face.
Metaphorically speaking, perfect lipstick, razor-sharp eyeliner, not a hair out of place. Classic feminine armor.
The observation, delivered with theatrical insight rather than judgment, caught Eleanor off guard. She'd spent extra time on her appearance that morning, selecting a charcoal pencil skirt and crisp white blouse that projected professional competence. Her power outfit, though she'd never described it as such out loud.
Thank you for the coffee. And the tactical assessment.
My pleasure. Give 'em hell, whoever they are.
As the cafe owner returned to her counter, Eleanor found herself wondering if her armor was as transparent to everyone as it had been to Diane. To Leo, who seemed to see through her carefully constructed professional facade with discomforting ease. The cafe door opened, bell chiming cheerfully despite the tension coiling in Eleanor's stomach. Richard Kincaid entered, his casual weekend attire replaced by an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Even on a Wednesday morning, he projected the effortless confidence of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around his presence. His gaze swept the cafe, cataloging and dismissing other patrons before settling on Eleanor with calculated precision.
Ms. Washington, prompt as expected.
He settled into the chair opposite her without waiting for invitation, arranging himself with the casual entitlement of the perpetually powerful.
Mr. Kincaid, thank you for agreeing to meet.
Curiosity more than courtesy, I assure you. Your message suggested you had information relevant to my development plans.
I do.
Eleanor drew strength from the familiar territory of professional confrontation. This, at least, was terrain she knew how to navigate. The careful positioning of legal argument, the strategic revelation of information. She placed a single document on the table between them, not the full historical designation application, but a concise summary of its key provisions highlighted for maximum impact.
I've been researching the historical significance of the Monroe Street block. As you can see, there's substantial evidence supporting special designation status under the city's preservation guidelines.
Richard's expression remained impassive as he glanced at the document, but Eleanor noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw, a nearly imperceptible tell that her arrow had found its mark.
Interesting approach. Creative, if ultimately futile.
The application meets all statutory requirements. The Harbor Street Artists Collective operated from those buildings from 1944 to 1953, producing work that influenced national artistic movements. Elena Martinez painted her most famous works in what is now Cornerstone Books.
Ancient history. Hardly relevant to contemporary urban planning.
The Preservation Board disagrees. I've already had preliminary discussions with them. They're quite interested in a site with such significant cultural history.
This wasn't entirely accurate. She'd exchanged emails with a junior staff member, not secured any official position. But Eleanor had spent years learning to project certainty in legal negotiations, to present possibilities as inevitabilities when strategic advantage required it. Something shifted in Richard's expression, a recalculation, a reassessment of the woman sitting across from him.
You've been busy for someone supposedly focused on finding employment.
I am capable of managing multiple priorities.
Clearly.
He leaned back, studying her with new attention.
Leo didn't mention you were this resourceful.
Leo doesn't speak for me.
Evidently not.
He reached for the document, examining it more carefully this time. Eleanor maintained her composed expression, though internally she was cataloging his reactions, searching for leverage points in his response.
This is more thorough than I would have expected from a volunteer legal effort.
I don't approach any legal matter casually, regardless of compensation.
Admirable professional ethics. Though I wonder if your efforts might be more profitably directed.
He returned the document to the table, his expression transitioning from assessment to something more strategic.
Tell me, Ms. Washington, what exactly are you hoping to accomplish here? Delay is the most you could achieve. My firm has resources and connections throughout this city that vastly outmatch a handful of small business owners, no matter how quaint their historical claims.
The law doesn't recognize resource disparity as a determining factor in preservation cases.
The law recognizes whatever those who can afford the best attorneys say it recognizes. A reality I suspect you're intimately familiar with from your time at Hargrove.
The casual reference to her former firm, implying both research into her background and dismissal of her current unemployment, landed with calculated precision. Eleanor kept her expression neutral despite the small flare of discomfort.
If you're suggesting that justice is merely a function of financial advantage, that's a remarkably cynical perspective for someone who once had Leo Bennett as a partner.
So he shared our history. Interesting.
Something in his tone suggested she'd revealed more than intended, though Eleanor couldn't immediately identify what leverage she'd inadvertently provided.
Leo always was an idealist. It's part of his charm, I suppose, though ultimately incompatible with sustained success in our industry.
He seems to have found success on his own terms.
A charming bookstore that barely breaks even is success by only the most generous definition.
Eleanor felt a flare of defensiveness on Leo's behalf, which she carefully suppressed beneath professional composure. She hadn't come here to debate definitions of success or to defend Leo's life choices.
The historical designation application will be filed by the end of the week. At minimum, it will trigger a statutory review period during which no demolition or significant alteration permits can be issued.
Creating what? A 3-month delay? 6 at most? A temporary inconvenience, not a permanent obstacle.
Sometimes temporary measures lead to permanent solutions.
Richard's expression shifted, calculation giving way to what appeared to be genuine interest. He studied Eleanor with new attention, as if reassessing a property he'd initially undervalued.
You're quite good, Ms. Washington. Better than your former firm appreciated clearly.
I don't require validation of my professional capabilities, Mr. Kincaid.
Perhaps not, but I suspect you do require employment. Unless Cornerstone Books has added a legal department I'm unaware of.
The reference to her unemployment status was clearly designed to provoke insecurity. Eleanor refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction.
What if we approached this from a different angle?
Meaning?
I've done my homework on you, Ms. Washington. Graduated top 10% from Columbia Law. Rising star at Hargrove until their recent restructuring. Specialized in corporate real estate and development law. Precisely the expertise my firm could utilize.
Eleanor maintained her neutral expression despite the sudden shift in direction. This wasn't at all what she had expected from the meeting.
Kincaid Partners is expanding our legal division. We need someone with your specific background in development law, particularly someone who understands the creative approaches to municipal regulations.
Are you offering me a job, Mr. Kincaid?
I'm suggesting a mutually beneficial arrangement. You'd begin as senior counsel in our real estate division, with partnership track within 3 years rather than the usual 7. Starting salary of $300,000, plus performance bonuses that typically add another $150. Full benefits, of course.
The figures landed with deliberate impact, nearly double what she'd earned at Hargrove, with faster advancement potential. An offer designed to be impossible to dismiss out of hand, regardless of principles or personal connections.
In return, you'd naturally recuse yourself from any extracurricular legal projects involving our development initiatives.
The implication was clear. Accept the position, abandon the historical designation effort, let Leo and the other business owners fend for themselves against Kincaid's development plans. Eleanor's mind raced through implications, weighing professional opportunity against personal loyalty, financial security against emerging values. The offer was exceptional by any objective standard, exactly the kind of opportunity she'd been pursuing since her first day of unemployment. Yet the thought of abandoning the historical designation project, of watching Cornerstone Books demolished to make way for luxury condos, created a visceral discomfort she couldn't easily dismiss.
That's certainly a generous offer.
I don't believe in half measures, Ms. Washington. When I identify talent worth acquiring, I make competitive offers.
His phrasing, talent worth acquiring, like a property or investment, struck Eleanor as revealing. She was an asset to be obtained, a resource to be deployed, not a person with values or connections to be respected.
I'd need your answer relatively quickly. We're finalizing the legal team for the Monroe Street project, and your expertise would be valuable as we move forward.
I assume there's a formal interview process?
Normally, yes. In your case, I'm prepared to extend an offer based on your credentials and reputation. Call it executive discretion.
Eleanor kept her expression carefully neutral despite the internal conflict raging beneath. The rational, strategic part of her brain, the part that had guided her career choices for years, recognized the exceptional nature of the offer. The security, status, and financial stability she'd been desperately seeking for 30 days, delivered on a silver platter. Yet another part of her, the part that had begun to awaken through her interactions with Leo, through the satisfaction of working to protect something meaningful, recoiled at the obvious manipulation, at the calculated attempt to neutralize her opposition by absorption.
This is unexpected. I'll need time to consider.
Of course. Though I should mention that the partnership is voting on final project approval tomorrow afternoon. Having our legal team fully constituted would be advantageous before that vote.
The deliberate pressure tactic was transparent but effective. Eleanor recognized both the manipulation and her own vulnerability to it. The ingrained response to professional urgency that had been cultivated throughout her legal career.
I should also clarify that this offer is entirely independent of any personal connections you might have formed. Strictly professional recognition of your capabilities.
The casual reference to her relationship with Leo landed with uncomfortable precision, suggesting that Richard knew more about their connection than he should. Eleanor maintained her composed expression despite the discomfort this realization triggered.
I appreciate the clarification.
Excellent. Then I'll expect your response by tomorrow morning.
He stood, smoothing his already immaculate suit.
And, Ms. Washington, I'd appreciate discretion regarding this offer until you've made your decision. Professional courtesy.
The request carried obvious subtext. Don't discuss this with Leo or the other business owners until you've decided whether to abandon them for career advancement. Eleanor nodded without explicitly agreeing, unwilling to commit even to that minor constraint.
I look forward to your call.
As Richard departed, the bell above the cafe door chiming with jarring cheerfulness in his wake, Eleanor remained seated, the historical designation documents now overshadowed by the unexpected job offer. $300,000, partnership track, security, status, professional validation, after a month of rejection and uncertainty. Everything she'd been pursuing since Hargrove had optimized her out of their workforce. And all it would cost was abandoning Leo and the other small business owners to Kincaid's development plans. All it would require was returning to exactly the person she'd been before, prioritizing professional advancement over personal connection, security over meaning, external validation over internal satisfaction. A simple choice by traditional metrics. The rational, strategic option was obvious. So why did the thought of accepting create such profound discomfort? Eleanor gathered her documents, needing movement to process the conflicting impulses battling within her. She approached the counter where Diane was creating elaborate foam designs on a customer's latte.
Thank you for the coffee. What do I owe you?
On the house, remember? Though you look like you lost the battle you were preparing for.
Not lost. Just complicated.
Ah, the worst kind of outcome. Give me a straight defeat any day over complications.
The theatrical exaggeration in Diane's tone drew a small smile from Eleanor, despite her internal turmoil.
Leo stopped by earlier looking for you.
He did?
Said something about checking the cafe on his morning walk with Apollo. Seemed disappointed to miss you.
A complicated tangle of emotions tightened in Eleanor's chest. Guilt for her 3-day silence, warmth at the thought that he'd been looking for her, anxiety about how to explain Richard's offer without sounding like she was considering betrayal. Because she wasn't considering it. Was she? The rational part of her brain, the part that had guided her professional decision-making for years, insisted on evaluating all options objectively. $300,000, partnership potential, security and status after a month of growing financial anxiety. Yet the thought of Leo's expression if she accepted, of watching Cornerstone Books demolished for luxury condos, of returning to exactly the professional identity she'd begun questioning, it created a visceral discomfort no rational analysis could dispel.
If you see him again, would you tell him I'll stop by the bookstore later? There are some developments we should discuss.
Consider it done, darling. Though if you don't mind some unsolicited advice from a former Broadway chorus girl.
Yes?
In my experience, the most interesting scenes happen when characters stop calculating and start feeling. Just something to consider.
The observation, delivered with theatrical wisdom rather than judgment, landed with unexpected weight. Eleanor nodded her thanks before exiting the cafe, mind still racing with the implications of Richard's offer and how to explain it to Leo. Outside, spring sunshine bathed the riverside path in golden light. Eleanor paused, orienting herself toward her apartment where the historical designation application awaited final revisions before submission. A familiar figure appeared around the bend in the path, tall, slightly rumpled, with a distinctive husky trotting beside him. Leo. His morning walk with Apollo had brought him directly into her path, the timing either miraculous or disastrous depending on perspective. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken, an automatic physical response she couldn't control despite her professional composure. 3 days of distance hadn't diminished the effect of seeing him, of remembering the intimacy they'd shared, the connection that had formed between them. He spotted her. Recognition followed immediately by a smile that transformed his features. No calculation, no strategy, just genuine pleasure at her presence. Apollo noticed her too, his tail beginning to wave in excited recognition.
Ellie, I was just looking for you.
The simple greeting, warm without pressure or expectation, made the weight of Richard's offer feel suddenly heavier. How could she explain the position she now found herself in? How could she articulate the professional opportunity without sounding as if she was considering abandoning him and the neighborhood preservation effort?
Leo, I was actually hoping to talk to you.
As he drew closer, Eleanor could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the slight strain around his mouth suggesting he hadn't been sleeping well. Had her 3-day silence affected him that deeply? The possibility created both warmth and discomfort, the recognition of impact implying connection she both craved and feared.
Great minds thinking alike, apparently. I've been working on gathering those community impact statements for the historical designation. Marcus has old photographs from the artists' collective that strengthen our case considerably.
He was already fully engaged in the preservation effort, his enthusiasm unmarred by calculation or doubt. The contrast between his straightforward commitment and her own conflicted position increased Eleanor's discomfort.
That's excellent. We'll need all the documentation possible.
Are you okay? You seem tense.
Of course he would notice. Leo's perception, his ability to read beneath her carefully maintained surface, had both drawn her to him and terrified her from the beginning.
I just had a meeting with Richard Kincaid.
Richard, why?
I wanted to present our historical designation strategy to see how he'd respond. Gauge potential counter-arguments.
Bold move. How did he take it?
He was
She hesitated, searching for the right words.
less dismissive than I expected. He recognized the potential for at least temporary delays.
Which buys us time to strengthen the permanent designation application.
Exactly.
She should tell him about the job offer, about Richard's transparent attempt to neutralize her opposition by absorption, about the conflict now raging within her between professional opportunity and personal loyalty. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled in fears she couldn't easily articulate. Fear of Leo's judgment, fear of her own uncertainty, fear of the vulnerability that complete honesty would require.
Did he make any specific counteroffers, alternative approaches?
The exact question she'd been dreading. Eleanor felt heat rising to her cheeks, the physical betrayal of discomfort she couldn't entirely suppress.
He made an unexpected proposition.
Knowing Richard, I can imagine. Bribery, threats, some combination of the two?
He offered me a position with his firm, senior counsel in their real estate division.
Leo's expression shifted, comprehension dawning with uncomfortable speed.
With the condition that you drop the historical designation effort.
Not explicitly stated, but heavily implied.
And you're considering it.
It wasn't a question. The certainty in his tone, the resignation beneath it, suggested he'd read her internal conflict with devastating accuracy.
I told him I would consider the offer. It's a significant opportunity. 300,000 base salary. Partnership track.
The words sounded hollow as she spoke them, the impressive figures diminished by the expression forming on Leo's face. Not anger or accusation, but something far worse. Disappointment layered with understanding, as if he'd expected this outcome from the beginning.
Of course you'd consider it. It's exactly what you've been working toward all month.
Leo, it's more complicated than...
Is it? Security, status, financial stability. The pillars of success by conventional metrics.
His tone wasn't accusatory but resigned, which somehow made it worse. Anger she could have defended against. This quiet acceptance offered no such opportunity.
I haven't accepted the offer.
But you're going to. We both know that.
The certainty in his assessment stung precisely because Eleanor couldn't honestly contradict it. The rational, strategic part of her, the part that had guided her career choices for years, recognized the exceptional nature of Richard's offer. Everything she'd been seeking since her first day of unemployment, handed to her on a silver platter.
I haven't decided anything.
Your hesitation says otherwise, Ellie.
He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, a gesture she now recognized as indicating emotional strain.
It's okay, really. I understand the position you're in.
Do you?
Better than most. I walked away from that world, remember? I know exactly what you'd be giving up if you declined.
His understanding somehow made the situation worse. Anger would have been easier to navigate than this compassionate resignation, this acceptance of her potential betrayal.
Richard is extremely good at identifying leverage points, at offering exactly what will overcome resistance.
You think I'm being manipulated.
I think you're being offered something designed to appeal to values you've built your professional identity around. There's nothing manipulative about accurately assessing someone's priorities.
The observation landed with uncomfortable precision. Eleanor couldn't refute his assessment, couldn't articulate the complex tangle of ambivalence she felt about a decision that should have been straightforward by traditional metrics.
I'm not going to make any impulsive decisions.
I know you won't. Careful analysis is your specialty.
There was no sarcasm in his tone, only resignation tinged with something like grief. He glanced down at Apollo, who had settled at their feet, seemingly content despite the tension radiating between the humans above him.
For what it's worth, I think you'd be exceptional at whatever path you choose. Richard recognizes quality, whatever else his flaws.
His generosity in this moment, the absence of pressure or guilt despite the personal impact her decision would have on him, only intensified Eleanor's internal conflict. Leo was offering her freedom to choose without recrimination, even knowing that choice might result in the destruction of his beloved bookstore.
You're not going to try to convince me to decline?
Would it work if I did?
The question hung between them, unanswered, because they both knew the truth. Eleanor had spent years building her identity around professional achievement, around external validation, around the security that came with clear metrics for success. A few weeks of connection, of glimpsing an alternative path, couldn't easily overcome those deeply ingrained patterns.
Whatever you decide, I respect your right to make that choice, Ellie. We all have to determine our own definitions of success.
He looked away briefly, gaze tracking the river's flow beside them.
I should get back to the store. Shipment arriving this morning.
Leo,
It's okay, really. You've already done more for the neighborhood than anyone could have expected. Whatever happens next, I appreciate everything you've contributed.
The past tense landed with the weight of a verdict, already positioning her efforts as completed, as history rather than ongoing commitment, as if he'd already calculated the outcome of her decision and adjusted his expectations accordingly. Apollo sensed the shift in energy, rising to press against Leo's leg in canine concern. Leo patted the husky's head absently, his gaze returning to Eleanor with an expression she couldn't fully interpret, resignation mixed with something deeper, more painful.
Goodbye, Ellie.
Not see you later or talk soon, but goodbye. A finality that suggested he viewed this as their true parting, regardless of whether they might physically encounter each other again. Before Eleanor could formulate a response, he turned and continued along the path, Apollo glancing back once before following. She watched his retreating figure, the casual slump of his shoulders suggesting defeat rather than his usual relaxed posture. The sunlight continued to bathe the riverside path in golden warmth, oblivious to the cold spreading through Eleanor's chest. She had achieved exactly what she'd set out to do that morning: present the historical designation strategy to Richard, gauge his response, identify potential counterarguments. Instead, she'd received an unexpected job offer, a path back to professional security and status. Everything she'd been pursuing since her first day of unemployment. By conventional metrics, this morning should have been counted as a tremendous success. So why did it feel like devastating failure? Eleanor remained rooted in place long after Leo had disappeared around the bend in the path, Apollo's blue-tipped tail the last glimpse before they vanished from view. The river continued its endless flow beside her, indifferent to human concerns about career trajectories and preservation efforts, and connections severed before they could fully form. The historical designation documents felt suddenly heavy in her bag, weighted with implications beyond legal strategy. They represented a choice, not just about professional focus or neighborhood preservation, but about what kind of person she wanted to be. What values would guide her decisions when security and meaning came into direct conflict? Richard expected her answer by tomorrow morning. Less than 24 hours to make a decision with implications far beyond immediate employment prospects. The path stretched before her, leading back toward her apartment where the historical designation application awaited final revisions. Or toward something else entirely. A future of financial security and professional advancement, acquired at the cost of both a neighborhood's preservation and a connection that had begun to transform her understanding of what might actually matter. Eleanor took a single step forward, then stopped again, paralyzed by the weight of the choice before her. The structured decision-making process that had guided her professional life offered no clear direction when the metrics themselves were in question. When what she valued, what constituted success, had become the central uncertainty rather than merely the means of achieving it. For the first time in her meticulously planned adult life, Eleanor Washington found herself without a map, without clear criteria for evaluating the paths before her. Only the memory of Leo's expression as he'd said goodbye, resignation layered with something deeper, something that looked devastatingly like a heartbreaking before her eyes, and the uncomfortable recognition that her own heart might be breaking too, for reasons her rational mind couldn't fully articulate or dismiss. Chapter 12. Demolition Plans. Eleanor remained frozen on the riverside path, watching Leo's retreating figure until he disappeared around the bend. The historical designation documents in her bag seemed to grow heavier with each passing second, a physical manifestation of the choice she now faced. $300,000. Partnership track. Everything she'd been desperately seeking for the past 30 days. All it would cost was the destruction of a neighborhood, the betrayal of people who had welcomed her into their community, the abandonment of a connection that had begun to transform her understanding of what might actually matter. A simple choice, by traditional metrics. The distant sound of machinery broke through her paralysis, a mechanical groaning followed by the high-pitched safety beeping of a vehicle in reverse. Construction noise wasn't unusual in the city, but something about its proximity drew Eleanor's attention. She turned toward the source, realizing it was coming from the direction of Monroe Street, where Cornerstone Books and its neighboring businesses stood. Without conscious decision, Eleanor found herself walking toward the sound, her pace increasing with each step until she was nearly running. The legal documents bounced against her hip as she moved, their weight a persistent reminder of what hung in the balance. As she turned onto Monroe Street, the source of the noise became immediately apparent. A large excavator was being unloaded from a flatbed truck, its massive yellow arm folded awkwardly to fit the transport. Workers in safety vests directed the operation with practiced efficiency, barely noticing the woman who had stopped abruptly at the corner, face draining of color. The side of the excavator bore the logo of Kincaid Development Partners.
Ma'am, you need to stay behind the safety line.
Eleanor blinked, realizing she had stepped into the cordoned-off area without noticing. She backed up mechanically, eyes still fixed on the heavy machinery. A few storefronts down, She could see Cornerstone Books, its green awning a stark contrast to the industrial yellow of the construction equipment.
What's happening here?
Site prep. They're starting demo on the western end next week.
But the permits...
Above my pay grade, ma'am. I just operate the equipment.
Eleanor stepped back further, taking in the full scene. It wasn't just the excavator. Further down the block, workers were placing orange construction fencing around several buildings, establishments she now recognized as those already purchased by Kincaid Partners. A man in a hard hat was examining blueprints spread across the hood of a truck, pointing out features to a younger colleague. Demolition preparations. Happening now, not in some hypothetical future after Richard secured the remaining properties. The physical manifestation of his confidence that the holdouts would eventually surrender, or perhaps a strategic move designed to increase pressure on those same holdouts, including Leo. Eleanor's pulse quickened, her lawyer's mind immediately assessing the timeline implications. Richard had said the partnership was voting on final project approval tomorrow. He couldn't possibly have legal clearance to begin demolition this quickly, not with the historical designation application pending. Unless he knew something she didn't. Unless he had connections that could expedite permits, bypass normal procedures, fast-track approvals in ways that circumvented standard regulatory processes. The realization landed with uncomfortable weight. Richard's confidence wasn't just bravado. It was the certainty of someone who had already arranged for obstacles to be removed, who viewed regulations as minor inconveniences rather than actual barriers. Eleanor found herself moving again, this time with deliberate purpose toward Cornerstone Books. The bell above the door would chime its welcome, and she would find Leo among his carefully categorized volumes, Apollo at his feet. She would explain that Richard was already positioning equipment, that the threat was immediate rather than theoretical, that whatever decision they made needed to happen now. But when she pushed open the bookstore door, the space beyond was empty. No Leo arranging displays or helping customers. No Apollo lounging on his cushion near the register. Just shelves of books standing in silent witness to an absence that felt suddenly, profoundly wrong.
Leo?
Her voice echoed in the quiet space, receiving no response. She moved deeper into the store, noting that the closed sign remained on the door despite it being unlocked. The silence felt oppressive, at odds with the peaceful quiet that usually characterized the shop. On the counter, she spotted Leo's phone beside a half-empty coffee mug, evidence of hasty departure rather than planned absence. Beside it lay a note in unfamiliar handwriting, emergency meeting at Diane's. 10:30. Eleanor checked her watch. 10:42. Without hesitation, she turned and left the bookstore, making sure the door locked behind her. The construction noise had intensified as she jogged toward Riverside Cafe, the mechanical growl providing an ominous soundtrack to her thoughts. Through the cafe's large windows, she could see a gathering around the largest table in the back corner. Leo sat with his back to the entrance, shoulders hunched in a posture she recognized as tension rather than his usual relaxed stance. Around him were faces she now recognized. Marcus from the flower shop, his silver hair gleaming under the cafe lights. Diane gesturing emphatically as she spoke. An older woman Eleanor assumed was the bakery owner Leo had mentioned. Eleanor hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain of her welcome. These people had every reason to see her as the enemy now. The lawyer who might abandon their cause for personal gain, who was considering an offer from the very man threatening their livelihoods. The weight of Richard's proposition hung around her neck like a stone. $300,000. Partnership track. Professional validation after a month of rejection. All it would cost was everything else that had begun to matter. Before she could decide whether to enter or retreat, Diane looked up and spotted her through the window. Their eyes met, the cafe owner's expression unreadable. Then Diane raised her hand in a gesture that might have been greeting or summons. Either way, Eleanor's choice was made for her. The bell above the cafe door chimed as she entered, the sound causing heads to turn in her direction. Leo was the last to look, his expression shifting from surprise to something more complicated when he saw her.
Well, look who's arrived, just in time for the War Council.
The theatrical delivery did nothing to disguise the genuine tension beneath. Eleanor approached the table slowly, acutely aware of being an outsider in this tight-knit group.
I saw the construction equipment.
Richard's not wasting any time. The bastard's already got crews marking utilities on the West End buildings.
Eleanor, I didn't expect to see you here.
His tone was carefully neutral, giving away nothing of what he might be feeling. The careful distance hurt more than outright coldness would have. A deliberate withdrawal rather than emotional reaction.
I went to the bookstore, found the note.
Pull up a chair, darling. You might as well hear our collective despair firsthand.
Eleanor took the offered seat, placing her bag with the historical designation documents beside her. The folder's edge peeked out, a silent reminder of the work she'd poured into a project she might now abandon.
We were just discussing our diminishing options. Richard's crews are already setting up. According to my contact at the city planning office, they've put the demolition permits on accelerated review.
He's forcing our hands, trying to make us panic and sell before your historical designation can be filed.
The older woman, presumably the bakery owner, addressed this to Eleanor directly. No accusation in her tone, but clear recognition of Eleanor's role in their defense strategy.
The application isn't complete yet, but we're close. If we can file by tomorrow morning, it would trigger an automatic review period. No demolition permits could be issued until that review concludes.
Which buys us time, but doesn't guarantee protection.
This was the first time he'd looked directly at her since she'd sat down. His eyes held none of their usual warmth, only a guarded assessment that made Eleanor's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't easily name.
Time we might use for what exactly? Richard has made it abundantly clear he won't stop until he owns the entire block.
My family has owned that flower shop for 3 generations. My grandfather built those display cases by hand.
And my great-aunt Millie started that bakery after the war. Her recipe book is still in our safe.
The personal histories landed with unexpected weight. These weren't just buildings or businesses to these people. They were legacies, connections to family past, identities built over decades rather than quarterly profit cycles.
The question is whether holding out changes anything in the end.
The resignation in his voice struck Eleanor with physical force. This wasn't the Leo who had spoken so passionately about community preservation, about spaces that mattered beyond their market value. This was someone who had begun calculating losses rather than fighting for victory.
What do you mean?
Richard has made it clear he has the resources and connections to outlast us. Even if we delay through legal channels, he can afford to wait. We can't.
Mortgage payments don't pause for historical reviews.
And suppliers don't accept fighting corporate greed as payment for coffee beans.
The practical concerns were valid, but the collective surrender in their tones felt wrong, discordant with everything Eleanor had come to know about these people. Especially Leo, who had once walked away from a partnership at Kincaid's firm rather than compromise his values.
So you're considering selling?
We're considering recognizing reality.
The sharp edge in his voice suggested this conclusion hadn't come easily or without internal struggle. Eleanor found herself searching his face for signs of the man who had made transcendent coffee and quoted philosophy while reorganizing fallen books, who had seen worlds within neighborhoods that others dismissed as merely real estate.
After all, some of us have received generous offers that would be foolish to refuse.
The reference to Richard's job proposition wasn't subtle. Eleanor felt heat rising to her cheeks, the embarrassment of having her private negotiation exposed layering upon the deeper discomfort of Leo's evident disappointment.
That's not...
Wait, what offer?
Richard offered Eleanor a position with his firm yesterday. Senior counsel, partnership track.
Well, the plot thickens.
Eleanor felt the weight of their combined attention, the shift from including her in their discussion to evaluating her as a potential adversary. Only the bakery owner's expression remained unchanged, her weathered features suggesting she'd witnessed too many betrayals in her long life to be surprised by one more.
I haven't accepted anything.
But you're considering it.
The same words from their earlier conversation, but now delivered before witnesses, with an edge that hadn't been present before. Eleanor felt herself straightening, professional armor sliding into place against this unexpected attack.
I'm evaluating all options, yes.
Can't blame her. We're sitting here doing the same thing, aren't we?
The flower shop owner's intervention diffused some of the tension, though the damage had been done. The careful distance Eleanor had sensed in Leo earlier had hardened into something colder, more deliberate.
So here we all are, calculating our surrender terms, while Richard's bulldozers idle at the curb.
The theatrical delivery didn't disguise the genuine bitterness beneath. Eleanor felt the collective defeat spreading through the group like a contagion, settling into postures and expressions with the weight of inevitable conclusion. These people had been fighting Richard's development plans for weeks or months before she'd appeared. They'd watched neighbors sell one by one, witnessed the gradual erosion of resistance. The machinery now assembling outside represented not just Richard's confidence, but the physical manifestation of a battle they'd been losing long before Eleanor entered their lives.
Eleanor, you have a legal perspective none of us possess. In your professional opinion, what are our actual chances with the historical designation?
The question landed with deliberate impact, forcing her to shift from observer to participant, from potential ally to expert witness. Leo's gaze held hers, not with warmth or connection, but with the focused assessment of someone calculating odds. Every instinct from her years of legal training urged Eleanor to offer the careful, qualified assessment she would provide to any client, to outline possibilities without promising outcomes, to acknowledge risks alongside potential benefits, to maintain professional distance rather than personal investment. But these weren't just clients, and the legal question wasn't merely academic.
The historical documentation is compelling. The artists' collective operated here during a significant period, produced work of recognized importance. There's clear precedent for designation based on cultural rather than architectural significance.
But the older woman's perception cut through Eleanor's careful framing, identifying the unspoken qualification.
But historical designation processes typically take months, not days. Richard has connections throughout city government. He's already accelerated the demolition permits. Even if we manage to trigger a review period, he could potentially expedite its conclusion or find workarounds.
So we're just postponing the inevitable.
I didn't say that.
You didn't have to.
The resignation in his voice, the defeat in his posture, it struck Eleanor with unexpected force. This wasn't the Leo she had come to know, the man who found possibility in interruption, who transformed chaos into opportunity.
Well, I for one refuse to go down without at least throwing my coffee beans at the bulldozers.
Dramatic gestures won't save our businesses, Diane.
No, but they'll make for a better final act than quiet submission.
The banter held an edge of gallows humor, the kind that emerges when practical hope has been exhausted. Eleanor felt something shifting within her as she watched these people, strangers a week ago, now somehow significant, begin calculating the terms of their surrender.
Richard's initial offers were fair at least, above market value.
Money doesn't replace legacy, Leo.
No, but it might fund a new beginning. Sometimes you have to recognize when continuing to fight costs more than what you're fighting for.
The words sounded wrong coming from him, discordant with everything Eleanor had come to know about Leo Bennett. The man who had walked away from a partnership at Kincaid's firm rather than compromise his values was now advocating practical surrender. What had changed? The answer landed with uncomfortable clarity. She had. Her potential acceptance of Richard's offer had broken something fundamental in Leo's resistance. If she, who had worked so closely with him on the historical designation, who had shared intimacy and connection beyond professional collaboration, could be swayed by Richard's tactics, what hope did they have of ultimate victory?
When is Richard expecting your decisions?
He called this morning. Said the partnership vote happens tomorrow afternoon. Wants our answers by tomorrow at noon.
Such a considerate destroyer of dreams, giving us a whole extra few hours to mourn.
The timeline matched what Richard had told Eleanor. Final approval tomorrow afternoon. Responses required by morning. A coordinated pressure campaign designed to force capitulation before legal obstacles could be fully deployed.
What would you do, Ms. Washington, if it were your family legacy at stake?
The direct question from the quiet bakery owner caught Eleanor off guard. Not a legal assessment, but a personal one, asking not for professional expertise, but for human judgment. Eleanor looked around the table, taking in each face in turn. Marcus with his weathered hands that had arranged flowers for 3 decades. Diane with her theatrical delivery masking genuine attachment to her cafe. The baker, whose name Eleanor still didn't know, but whose great-aunt's recipe book remained in the shop's safe. And Leo. The careful distance in his expression now, so different from the warm connection they'd shared days earlier, the resignation in his posture suggesting he'd already calculated the odds and found them wanting. What would she do? The question bypassed her professional training, her analytical mind, her strategic calculation of risks and benefits. It reached something deeper, more essential. The part of herself she'd begun to rediscover through her interactions with these people, with their neighborhood, with the man who looked at her now with such careful neutrality. She hesitated, caught between the person she had been, focused on security, on professional advancement, on external validation, and the person she had glimpsed possibility of becoming. Someone who recognized value beyond market assessment, who measured success in meaning rather than status.
It's okay, Eleanor. We understand the professional constraints you're operating under. No one expects legal counsel to make personal sacrifices for clients.
The careful formality of his framing, positioning her as legal counsel rather than friend or potential partner, created a distance that felt both deliberate and devastating, as if he was already detaching, already processing her as someone moving in a different direction.
That's not...
Well, this has been suitably depressing for a Wednesday morning. I need to check my pastry supplies if we're going to properly fuel our collective surrender.
The cafe owner rose with theatrical flourish, though the strain around her eyes suggested genuine distress beneath the performance. Marcus followed, murmuring something about calling his sister to discuss the family shop's fate. Only the baker remained seated, her weathered hands folded on the table, her gaze shifting between Eleanor and Leo with quiet assessment.
37 years I've been baking in that shop. Watched this neighborhood change, watched businesses come and go. But there was always a sense of place, of belonging. That's what Richard doesn't understand. Can't calculate on a spreadsheet.
She rose slowly, joints protesting the movement with audible complaint.
Whatever you decide, young man, don't make it out of defeat. Make it because it's right for you.
With that final observation, directed at Leo but somehow including Eleanor in its wisdom, the older woman departed, leaving them alone at the table. The distance between them, physical, emotional, philosophical, felt suddenly vast, unbridgeable.
You should take Richard's offer.
The statement landed with quiet finality, shocking in its directness. Eleanor felt her breath catch, unprepared for this abrupt shift.
What?
The position with his firm. You should take it. It's exactly what you've been working toward all month.
Leo, I haven't decided.
It's the rational choice, Eleanor. Security, status, financial stability, everything you value.
There was no accusation in his tone, only resignation layered with a sadness that cut deeper than anger would have. As if he'd calculated the outcome and accepted it, however painful the conclusion.
That's not fair. You don't know what I value.
Don't I? You've been remarkably consistent in your priorities since the day we met. Practicality over possibility, security over meaning, control over connection.
The assessment landed with uncomfortable accuracy, describing not just her actions but the underlying framework that had guided her life for years. The careful construction of a persona defined by professional achievement rather than personal fulfillment.
I don't blame you for it. We all make choices based on what matters most to us.
And you've already decided what matters most to me.
Haven't you?
The simple question hung between them, unanswered because they both recognized the truth it contained. Eleanor had spent years building her identity around professional success, around external validation, around the security that came with clear metrics for achievement. A few weeks of connection, of glimpsing an alternative path, couldn't easily overcome those deeply ingrained patterns.
For what it's worth, I think you'd excel at whatever path you choose. Richard recognizes talent, whatever his other flaws.
His generosity in this moment, offering affirmation despite his evident disappointment, only intensified Eleanor's internal conflict. The distance between them felt simultaneously necessary and unbearable, a protection against vulnerability that also prevented genuine connection. Through the cafe window, Eleanor could see the construction equipment still assembling along Monroe Street, yellow machines positioning themselves like predators surrounding wounded prey. The physical manifestation of Richard's confidence, of his certainty that resistance would ultimately crumble before superior resources.
What about you? Will you sell to Richard?
Does it matter?
Of course it matters.
Why? If you're joining his firm, our positions will be fundamentally opposed. Professional ethics would likely preclude your involvement in any case.
The careful framing, positioning them as potential professional adversaries rather than personal connections, created a distance that felt both deliberate and devastating. As if he was already detaching, already processing her as someone moving in a different direction.
We should probably maintain appropriate boundaries going forward.
Appropriate boundaries?
Professional separation, especially if you accept Richard's offer.
The deliberate formality, so at odds with the intimacy they'd shared, felt like physical pain. Eleanor recognized the protective withdrawal for what it was, not anger or judgment, but self-preservation. Leo building walls against the hurt her potential choice represented.
I haven't accepted anything yet.
But you will. We both know that.
The certainty in his assessment stung precisely because Eleanor couldn't honestly contradict it. The rational, strategic part of her, the part that had guided her career choices for years, recognized the exceptional nature of Richard's offer. Everything she'd been seeking since her first day of unemployment, handed to her on a silver platter. Yet the thought of accepting created a visceral discomfort no rational analysis could dispel. The recognition that what she would gain in security and status, she would lose in meaning and connection. That returning to exactly who she had been before Hargrove's workforce optimization was no longer entirely desirable, however practical.
You've already decided what I'm gonna do.
I've calculated the most likely outcome based on available evidence. Isn't that what lawyers do?
There was no mockery in his tone, only resignation tinged with something like grief. He glanced toward the window where construction vehicles continued to assemble, their yellow bodies gleaming in the late morning sunlight.
I should go. Need to start cataloging inventory if we're going to liquidate.
The casual reference to dismantling his carefully curated bookstore hit Eleanor with unexpected force. The thought of those shelves emptied, those reading nooks dismantled, those handwritten category signs discarded, It created a hollow ache beneath her ribs that no professional opportunity could fill.
Leo, please.
It's okay, Ellie. Really. You have to make the choice that's right for you. We all do.
He rose from the table, gathering the papers Marcus had left behind. Property valuations, Richard's offers, options for relocation. The physical evidence of surrender already in progress.
Goodbye, Eleanor.
The formality of her full name, after days of Ellie spoken with warmth and connection, felt like a door closing. A deliberate return to distance, to the careful neutrality of acquaintances rather than the intimacy of potential partners. Before she could formulate a response that bridged this sudden chasm, Leo had turned and walked away, the bell above the cafe door chiming with jarring cheerfulness as he departed. Through the window, Eleanor watched him pause on the sidewalk, shoulders slumped in a posture she now recognized as defeat rather than his usual relaxed stance. Apollo wasn't with him, still at the bookstore perhaps, or with one of the other business owners, and his solitary figure struck her with unexpected poignancy. A man preparing to dismantle not just a business but a dream, to surrender not just property but purpose. And her position in this unfolding drama? Potential betrayer. Someone considering alliance with the very force threatening everything Leo had built, everything these people valued beyond market assessment. The historical designation documents still lay in her bag, the folder's edge visible as a silent accusation. Work she'd poured herself into, a cause she'd begun to believe in beyond professional challenge. A neighborhood worth preserving not just for architectural merit, but for the human connections it fostered, the community it sustained. Outside, the construction equipment continued its ominous assembly, excavators and bulldozers positioning themselves like an invading force awaiting final orders. The physical manifestation of Richard's confidence, of his certainty that resistance would ultimately crumble before superior resources. And perhaps he was right. Perhaps continuing to fight when defeat seemed inevitable was merely delaying the unavoidable conclusion. Perhaps calculating losses rather than pursuing victory was the rational approach when the power imbalance was so profound. The thought settled over Eleanor with the weight of pragmatic surrender. The same calculation Leo appeared to have made. The same recognition of reality rather than idealistic resistance. Richard expected her answer by tomorrow morning. Less than 24 hours to make a decision with implications far beyond immediate employment prospects. A choice that would define not just her professional path, but her understanding of herself, of what she valued beyond security and status. As Eleanor gathered her things, the historical designation documents heavy in her bag, she found herself paralyzed by the weight of the choice before her. The structured decision-making process that had guided her professional life offered no clear direction when the metrics themselves were in question. When what she valued, what constituted success, had become the central uncertainty rather than merely the means of achieving it. Through the window, she could no longer see Leo, lost among the pedestrians moving along Monroe Street, perhaps already back at his bookstore calculating inventory for liquidation, preparing to dismantle the careful categories, the thoughtful displays, the space he'd created as sanctuary against the very world he was now surrendering to. And in that surrender, Eleanor recognized her own potential capitulation, not just to Richard's professional offer, but to the narrower definition of success she'd begun questioning, to security over meaning, to status over connection, to conventional achievement over authentic fulfillment. The choice remained unmade, the future unwritten. But as Eleanor left the cafe, stepping into the sunlight now shadowed by construction equipment, the weight of impending surrender pressed against her chest with physical force. Some battles couldn't be won, only survived. Some losses couldn't be prevented, only processed. Some endings couldn't be avoided, only accepted with whatever grace one could muster. Perhaps that was the reality Leo had already embraced. Perhaps that was the wisdom in his resignation, in his calculation of losses rather than resistance. Perhaps that was the choice she too would make when tomorrow's deadline forced her hand. The thought settled over Eleanor like a shadow, dampening the spring sunshine as she walked past the assembled machinery, past the workers marking utilities for excavation, past the physical evidence of a conclusion already determined before resistance had fully formed. Sometimes the most rational choice was surrender, however much it cost the heart making that calculation.